So welcome everyone. I'm Rakesh Sangani, and welcome to Outsourcing Talks. So we've introduced this podcast to give you a no-nonsense view of what's really happening in outsourcing. In particular today, we're going to focus on BPO and we're going to focus on the future of BPO. So I'm really pleased to have with me today Mr. Paul Morrison. Paul, do you want to give a quick intro of yourself, and then I'll do the same?
Sure. Thanks, Rakesh. Great to be with you today as well. I'm Paul Morrison, as you say there. I'm managing director at Proservartner, and my background, a big chunk of it has been taken up in the outsourcing advisory space. I started out my career back last millennium with Accenture, working on a number of outsourcing deals, and then working through advisory, helping clients to understand the opportunities and pitfalls of outsourcing, and very much focused in recent years on how to get digital value from outsourcing relationships. So looking forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul. And for those that don't know me, I'm Rakesh Sangani. I'm the chief exec of Proservartner. I know I look too young, but my background is I qualified as a chartered accountant way back when. Used to work for Arthur Andersen, and then Enron happened. Then worked at Deloitte, and then they closed down their outsourcing practice. Then worked at Accenture, and I've really been in this BPO, GBS, shared services space for about 20 odd years now. So, really excited to go through this no nonsense podcast today. This is our first of our series. We'll be doing about 6 of these around different topics within outsourcing. So let me get started. So today we're going to talk about the future of outsourcing, Paul. And I know you and I have very varied views around what the future looks like when we get our crystal ball out. I think on the one hand, I see analysts predicting 5% or even 9% growth in BPO year on year for the next 10 years. But on the other hand, what I see in the marketplace is I see insourcing is more popular than ever before. We're working on 6 insourcing projects last year. We were working on 1. The year before, we were working on 1. The year before that, I think it was about 1.
Yeah.
So that spiked up, not just for us, but in the marketplace. The deal sizes seem lower, seem smaller for organizations. Gone are the days when, you've got 1,000, 2,000 seat deals at the average. They seem a lot smaller in size. I think also outsourcing in a lot of businesses is seen as evil. It's seen as something that they really want to avoid doing, something that's not necessarily aligned with the culture of the organization. So we see a lot of organizations being kind of anti-outsourcing. So when I mix all of those together, what I see is actually, when I look at BPO specifically, the market's just not going to be the same over the next few years. I remember the days of when I was at Accenture and double promotions and a real burgeoning market with hyper growth, lots of organizations jumping onto the bandwagon. Do you see that changing now? Do you feel those pressures? Now, I'm not saying outsourcing is dead, but surely, the happy days of BPO are past us.
No, there's a lot to unpack there, and those symptoms, those trends you point to, they're definitely real, and they're definitely real examples that we can point to of insourcing, of reduced deal size. I think that's true. I think the challenge with BPO is that it's a very big and varied market to start with. So, in trying to form a view of what's happening, there are parts of the market that have gone through this maturity curve and have become low growth or no growth. There are other parts that are still coming on stream. There are geographies where outsourcing is growing faster than others. So there is a challenge around looking at the market in the round. I think, for those who are paid to count the deals globally and size them, there's no arguing with the fact that deals generally have got smaller. And I think that's a sign of the maturity of the whole sector. in that the largest deals were very difficult and often very difficult to manage, and have been broken up as a result. So I think that's a sign of maturity. But in terms of the aggregate gross market size, we're still talking about a $500 million industry in terms of BPO revenues, and it is continuing to grow on average. But I think the key thing to think about, as I try and sort of put it into context, is at the bottom of the stack, there are BPO deals that are coming back in house, but there's a constant wave of new activities that is becoming relevant for outsourcing. So I think of things in and around, and we'll probably talk a lot more around some of the data and analytical services that are new, simply didn't exist 5 or 10 years ago, becoming important markets in their own right. Or if you think about a mature BPO sector like finance and accounting, then parts of the finance stack that were previously seen as too difficult or too core to work with through an outsourcer are becoming outsourceable as well. So there's this constant flow of things in and out of the picture that I think that adds a bit of complexity to that overall scene.
So that's the complexity in the view of what's happening today. But where do you then see it in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, great question. And I think, ultimately we have to think about, what's changing. Is the market going to stay the same? And the reality is, if we think about the key functions that are most often BPO'd around finance or HR, then what's changing in those landscapes. For example, we could look at procurement as well, and we can look at industry specific processes. But these are clearly types of work that are going through massive change driven by technology, and there's all sorts of macro changes that are driving that, and also micro changes in terms of the quality and quantity of technology that's available to each of these functions. And that's the mega question that is reshaping the potential of BPO and captive shared services as well. So the question is, can a BPO provider give a better solution to that question about how do you mix technology with finance or HR or procurement or IT? And the reality is that if we think of some of the large global SIs or some of the BPO specialists, these organizations have got much more experience of thinking through how to work and get value from RPA, or get value from process mining, or get value from the latest finance cloud applications, or get value from S4. These guys are the super users. And that doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean that it's always the right thing to do. But that's a big factor, I think, in looking at the future of BPO providers and their relevance, is that that's a differentiator. And if I'm the head of GBS or a captive operation, and I'm approaching this question about how do I digitize order to cash and optimize DSO through technology, do I answer that myself internally, or do I work with a partner who has been through that journey with the technology multiple times? So I think that's the big question, how BPO and outsourcers step up to that challenge of becoming a digital transformation partner. And they've been talking about this for 15 years, so this is not new. But I think what is new is the maturity of the technologies, the maturity on the client side as well, their understanding about how to work with outsourcers. I think that it's coming together now. That means these tools and technologies are easier to deploy at a lower price point, and therefore the opportunity is more real.
But do you need your outsourcer to do that? So that's interesting. You mentioned technology as a driver in the future for outsourcing. And I see a lot of the BPO players move in that direction over the last few years. Suddenly operations that were called delivery centers are now called cognitive operations, and now called intelligent automation delivery centers, whereas actually they're just processing AP and AR. They've just got nice, sexy names around them. So, with that in mind, though, is that automation story with regards to BPO a myth or a reality? And do we really see that changing in the future? When I speak to some of our clients, they actually recognize that they achieved more out of automation outside of their BPO contract, and they were tired of relying on the BPO partner to deliver that. So, in the future, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, well, I think the reality is that it's not the BPO route to digitization is not always the right thing. This is a question that absolutely needs to be answered in the context of the client, and there will be many cases where the BPO route to digitalization is not right. So, I think that's absolutely never going to change. But the reality is that the outsourcers will bring two things in particular, I think, to the equation that make it the right answer sometimes. Firstly is around that scale and that experience, depth of experience. They have the ability to, if, for example, if we think about, I'm a head of finance, I want to deploy and generate deep insights into the functioning of my receivables process or my payables process through computer science and through data and analytics. Do I build that team up internally, or do I have access to the wider scale of the organization and the computer science expertise within that? So that's one thing. I think the second piece is, and I think this is lost in many conversations around the future of outsourcing, is that outsourcing is fundamentally, it's a commercial decision. And there's commercial dynamics that flow from it. And what do I mean by that? It means that when an agreement is reached in outsourcing, there is a deal. There is a deal in which a specialist is making a bet or making a prediction about the future and about the outcomes that can be achieved. And a price will be set, typically in BPO, in which future efficiencies are committed to at the outset of the relationship. And that is something that's a dynamic that doesn't exist if you're doing it internally, and therefore you can think about the future in a different way if you're working with an outsourcer. And there's risk there, but a lot of our clients come to us at the moment and say, we've got a massive operational challenge. We've got a 10, a 20% cost takeout for next year. And it's not always the right reason to do outsourcing, but it's one of the levers to pull on that can create dramatic change. And that's that commercial dynamic hasn't gone away, and is as important as ever to most of the organizations that we work with that do outsourcing.
Let's delve into that automation story a little bit more. So, what I see in the outsourcing marketplace is the expectation of efficiency is a lot higher today than it was maybe 5-10 years ago, on the back of RPA and automation tools that are much more readily accessible. So what we're seeing is, I guess, businesses insisting on 50% productivity savings over a course of a 5-7 year contract, as opposed to maybe a few years ago as a 20-30% bracket. And outsourcing companies are meeting that desire and that perspective. Do you see that as being sustainable? And do you see that as being achievable for the outsourcing firms that are committing to this?
It's a great stat, and it's true, or it's observed in the pricing that we advise on, and in the benchmarks that we've developed over the years. It's definitely a doubling in the last 5 years, where more of these digital tools have come to the front. And I think, to your question about is it sustainable? Well, I think those that want to succeed going forwards, have to sign up to that level of improvement. And that, I guess, does support your thesis or the hypothesis that says, BPO will be eaten by automation over time. After 5 years and another 5 years, you're left with a small rump of work in theory. But what we see for many of our clients that work with outsourcing over the years, with working with clients that have got 3rd, 4th, 5th generation BPO deals, is that they find new applications for the for the talent and for the effort, and move on to other work. So I think if we look at the BPO market and the providers and some of the well-known names in the space, margins have come down a bit in the last 5 years. That's definitely the case. But these are organizations that have grown and continue to grow significantly. There's some difficulty in unpicking when we look at the largest providers, exactly what's attributable to BPO in a way that we might recognize. But if we look at some of the specialist providers, they're still growing, and they're now very large organizations, even the pure play BPO providers. So they are surviving, they are growing, and they're still making money. So will it continue indefinitely? I think the wave of technology change we're seeing at the moment will continue for foreseeable few years to generate savings like that. I'm really excited about, and this isn't just an outsourcing story, but I'm really excited about what's happening in processing of language, NLP, natural language processing, that is powering, it's a computer science that's powering what used to be called optical character recognition, for example, extracting information off an invoice. And the technology for that has been around for years and years, but it was difficult and it didn't work. And it was maybe a 70% success rate, which isn't very good if you want to pay the right invoices. But now we're seeing from some of the work that we're doing is that we're in the high 90s. This technology is really coming into its own, and some amazing stuff we see on GPT-3, for example, some of the latest chatbot technology around really powerful AI-powered language processing. That is a game changer. Maybe we keep our eyes on that. But to your question, I think there's still more automation and digitalization coming through.
If we take out our crystal ball and we look at 10 years' time, do we envisage an environment where what was traditionally BPO being more transactional services is simply automated, automated with robots, automated with AI, automated with blockchain, automated with chatbots? Do we see that actually a large part of that has to be automated when we look at 10 years' time, and hence outsourcing firms need to almost reinvent themselves over that period of time?
I think something like that is happening, and it's panning out over these years. I think in 10 years' time will be a good checkpoint. I think from my view, it's going to impact different types of BPO to a varying degree. So if we take a service like payroll, for example, where there's still quite a lot of labor-intensive support needed to handle queries and issue resolution and so on, I can see in a highly transactional environment like that, the automation share of the burden is going to be very, very high, and that will be much more like a technology-enabled service, not quite straight through processing, but very, very high degree of automation with a thinner veneer of the expertise or the talent on top of it. Then I see, I don't know, industry-specific processes maybe sit in the middle. If we think about insurance processing, or some of the
claims processing, I assume you're talking about
claims, exactly, something like claims, or some of the financial services industry-specific processes. I think those possibly sit in the middle. They're going to be increasingly augmented of an activity like onboarding, for example, that used to be hugely labor-intensive, but now we've seen and worked with use cases where there's great automated ingestion of things like passports, certificates, automated background checks, automated interfacing with core systems that make these much more technology heavy, but still with a reasonable talent wrapper around it. And then I think there's a labor intensive, expertise intensive front end of newer processes like the data and analytics type services, where there's a lot of expertise still required, a lot of engagement, a lot of contextualization of the process and the service that's still valuable. So I think it's not all size fits one, but all of these processes, they are using more technology every day. So that is the direction of travel. But I strongly believe in the ability of some of these providers to find new areas of relevance. I think there's an equilibrium to be found and a set of areas to be found where these providers will be relevant and find value. And I think it's mirrored if we look beyond BPO. It's mirrored in the captive community and the GBS and shared services community as well. They face the same opportunities and challenge of finding value and relevance as automation does more of the work going forward.
Yeah, and so we've touched on technology, and you touched there on data analytics as well. So what I'm really hearing is, look, the people aspect, which makes up the major rationale for outsourcing for a lot of organizations, low-cost staff, or being able to bring in people in a different location at speed, is going to become less and less relevant. So, does the people objective become obsolete at some stage when it comes to BPO?
I don't think so. I think I'll have retired before that happens. That's not going to happen for a few years, hopefully. So I think this is a wave of change, and it's in 10 years' time, it may be a different game. But I think we both remember 10 or 15 years ago, for example, with the rise of RPA, and people were predicting BPOs like Gen 4 that was acquired by one of the global SIs. People predicted BPOs without people back then, and the reality is that technology is still complex. It does amazing things and is more powerful than ever before. But still, those challenges of integration, extracting value, and customers, suppliers, the people who are served by business services still want to be served by people. And I'm not talking just about customer contact there, but I think all processes, there's still the role of the expert, of the process owner, the process lead, the business partner, the analyst to deploy and make use of insights. So if we take examples like process mining. So process mining is doing amazing things to bring to life what's going on in the innards of a major ERP system, to crunch and visualize data in a way that's not been possible before. This is amazing stuff that can now be done with process mining. But that is generating new roles and new there's new expertise that is needed to do something with that data and to make it come to life and persuade and deploy those insights within the organization. It's not straight through. It's links in the chain have been digitized, but there are new roles and more valuable roles that are to be fulfilled with it. So I think I think for the foreseeable future, BPO or whatever we call it in 10 years' time is going to have that mix of technology and people.
Yeah, and process mining is an interesting one. So I would always advise organizations to use process mining as a mechanism to control the BPO contract and the governance and the metrics around that. The BPOs have invested heavily in process mining and in terms of bringing it into their contracts. The only problem with that is they then control the process mining. They may control the process. So yeah, that's always, I think, one of the challenges in our environment today. But what we're really painting a picture of here sounds like a future where it's humans augmented by technology, bringing in analytics, bringing in process capability. So, as we talk about then the future of outsourcing, if I was to ask you, what do you see as the three big things that people should be worried about today as they think about what's coming in the next 5-10 years? What would they be?
Yeah, it's great question. Look, I think they should, if we're talking about where they should worry, where they should focus, you may not be surprised to hear me say they've got to start with the fundamentals, and the fundamentals of outsourcing are still based on the need to have a clearly defined relationship based on a clear set of expectations and service based on a fair commercial deal. So what does that mean? That needs to be right. That needs to be defined well. So if there's a renewal of an outsourcing relationship, or a greenfield new outsourcing deal to be signed, that is fundamental. And all the talk in the world around the future of technology, if those fundamentals are not in place, then it will not succeed. So absolutely focus on that, and focus on the skills requirements around good service management that are vital as soon as the ink is dry on the contract. So that's absolutely fundamental. Secondly, thinking around the focus of this conversation, digital is becoming more important, and therefore, I think in an organization, if I'm a buyer of outsourcing services, I would need to continue to invest in the skills that I have to understand and plan that digital future for the end-to-end finance and HR procurement process. So, the roles of the global process owner are more important than ever in thinking through what that 2, 3, 4 year future looks like. So continue to focus on that, continue to build out the end-to-end vision for a process where the outsourcer will typically play some of the roles in that, but very rarely the whole end-to-end. So continue to maintain that leadership of the digital agenda and work with the outsourcer within that. And then I think one of the areas that's, I think, exciting as a change in focus, I think, is there's a lot of talk about experience, user experience, employee experience, supplier experience in the whole services landscape. And I think that's starting to become real in connection to a large part with many of the technologies we're talking about. But there's still a long way to go. But I think starting to pay that more attention, starting to think through how to optimize the experience as well as the process of finance or HR, for example, is relevant now. Thinking about the journeys of different types of people as they engage with the function, it's really important. And we see some of the softwares that are available in the market making it much easier to really improve experience. But if we think of the core BPO functions, most of those, if we think about supplier management, most of those, for example, I think 50%, only 50% of supplier management organizations have a supplier portal. So there's a long way to go in improving that experience side of the equation. But I think we're getting to a stage now where it's moving beyond lip service, and organizations are investing in talent in that space. And I think it's going to shape and elevate some of the work that's been done in an outsourcing context.
Excellent. The final topic, I think, from my perspective, is then around the topic of insourcing. Yeah. So I guess what I'm seeing in the marketplace is probably down to 3 reasons. One is the maturity in the marketplace around BPO. So organizations go through a 7-year contract, they get to the end of that contract, and they're like, actually, we've achieved that efficiency. Our processes are more stable. We've got automation. We're at a stage where we can bring this back in-house and generate further benefit than keeping it with the BPO. So we see that maturity piece definitely. The second reason we see is that it's just not working, right? Yeah. So they've giving it to a third party. The BPO is then maybe bitten off more than they can chew. They're not able to deliver the quality, the speed, the satisfaction within the internal organization that's desired, and is brought back in-house. The organization admits they made a mistake and they bring it back in-house. And then the third area is that they've just don't like to outsource. So, I think for some companies, culturally, it's seen as the wrong thing to do, whilst it may cost them more having it back in-house from that commercial perspective. They find it's just not aligned to their business culture. And we're doing a lot of work in that area and we're seeing it grow. So what's your view around how insourcing will look like in the next 5-10 years?
it's definitely there, and I think I'd add a sort of subset to one of those groupings you mentioned there. I think the point around not liking outsourcing, we definitely see that most clearly where there's a change of leadership, and simply where the sponsor or lead, the CFO or head of operations, just doesn't do outsourcing. It's not their thing, and they choose to change direction. I think it's going to continue to be a feature of the landscape. I think personally, where we see insourcing, it's usually at the fringes, I would say, or most often. So where a deal or a relationship was badly scoped, or the wrong task, or a task that was beyond the supplier's capability was included. I think that's very common, and that's a sort of a good natural recalibration of what's being done. Maybe in some of these areas we talked about earlier, where it is highly transactional, and frankly the technology can do most of the work, and in those cases the rationale for having a third party to run it simply becomes too small a part of the equation. I think that can happen, and taking back control, to use a slogan, is the right thing to do. So I think we'll continue to see it, and maybe there'll be other types of other terms that might be used. I think in those situations where it's highly technology driven, the label BPO probably doesn't won't be applicable, and the sorts of partnerships that we may see will be more around point inputs of technology, sort of implementation or integration partnerships that are shorter in duration, or we fall back into the partnerships that are focused purely on the software element, on the SaaS element, which we haven't talked a great deal about, but that's the other sort of big mega trend that has sort of shaped the whole landscape of BPO, is the rise of cloud-based solutions and systems, and that's going to continue to accelerate. And I think if we step outside the BPO umbrella for a moment and we look at ITO, there are huge chunks of the ITO landscape that have been eaten by as a service offerings from the hyperscalers and the Googles and the Microsofts of the world that simply don't exist as outsourcing opportunities anymore. So maybe the IT world has seen it first before BPO.
Fantastic. Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Paul, for joining me on episode 1 of our Outsourcing Talk series. That was really enjoyable. I think my key 3 takeaways from our discussion really is, firstly, that outsourcing is not dead, but it is changing. I think gone are the days where you're just outsourcing transactional activity and expecting that to drive value and benefit within your organization. I think my second takeaway was around automation is most prevalent in the transactions, and more you should be outsourcing for skills and competencies that you may not have today, whether it's data analytics, whether it's to accelerate your automation, whether it's just a skill base that you have in short supply within your organization. So it's more outsourcing for skill rather than outsourcing for scale. And in my third takeaway is probably that outsourcing is maybe even the wrong question. And actually the right question should be, how do I achieve my outcome, whatever that might be? Customer satisfaction, reduce costs, improved controls, happier employees, whatever that may be. And maybe it's a case of leveraging both your own competence and third parties to optimize that. And we need to move away from outsourcing is evil and think about how it aids us in achieving the right outcome that we're trying to create. And then I guess if I was to add one more, my fourth takeaway would probably be outsourcing by itself doesn't create value. So you need to constantly be reshaping what you're doing and how you're doing it, so it creates value for your organization. So those were my 4 takeaways. You've been a fantastic colleague in this discussion today, Paul.
Really enjoyed the chat. Thank you. Thanks.